Vale, todo es un tema esto de la tecnología. Ok. Mm, claro que está, pero no me sale aún. Lo que me sale para poder eliminar, sacar acá para. Ya, ok. Bueno, vamos a empezar entonces.
Okay.
Good evening and good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first day of the sixth edition of Paraguay Speaks. I would like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from where we are all gathered today, and we pay our respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Welcome everyone to the webinar on teacher education, eye tracking, and intercontinental studies. This event is now live on the PSA YouTube channel, and it will also be recorded in case you want to watch it later. This webinar aims to analyze how do prior studies in linguistics interconnect with neuroscience and development psychology. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can leave your questions both on the chat and in the question box, and I will read them at the end of the presentation. Without any more preambles, I would like to introduce our speaker, Laura Galeano. She pursued a bachelor's degree in English language at the Universidad Nacional de Asunción in Paraguay, a master's in neuroscience and education at the University of Bristol, UK, and is currently in the fourth year of her PhD in didactics with a focus on cognitive development and learning at the University of Uppsala in Sweden. She comes from a background of teaching English as a foreign language for over 10 years in Paraguay, where she has worked with children, teenagers, and adults alike. Part of this time has been devoted to instructing future language teachers at university level and performing supervisory and coordinating roles at private bilingual schools in Paraguay. In parallel to her PhD project, she's involved in several interdisciplinary collaborations in Sweden and abroad, such as transnational ongoing project in Bhutan, Turkey, Zimbabwe, Greenland, and Paraguay. Welcome to Paraguay Speaks, Laura, and thank you for meeting with us today.
Well, good afternoon for you guys over there. It's a good morning in Berlin, where I am today. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit of what I'm doing at the moment. And I guess I should start right away with sharing my screen. Is that okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. 1 second. Does that work?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's working.
Super. So teacher education, eye tracking, and intercontinental studies is a very broad topic. It was my choice based on the suggested topic when you asked me if I wanted to be part of this conference. So I think that I want to start the presentation by addressing a fairly common question that I'm asked often. And this is related to how do prior studies in linguistics, which is what I did as my bachelor's in Paraguay, interconnect with neuroscience and developmental psychology. Now, if there is people listening that has background in language studies or has studied to become a language teacher in Paraguay, some of this overlap may not come as such a big surprise, actually. But basically, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to have a look at how these fields of research and knowledge overlap in order to provide research findings that might be useful to education. Another way to summarize my field of research without going over each of these areas is to say that I'm doing educational neuroscience research. So that's another term that might be interesting to mention. So linking linguistics with neuroscience is not as new as when people refer to neuroscience as a field of its own. And this is because neurolinguistic has some years in its back, and what neurolinguistics does is explore the connection between language studies, as in examining human behavior in the process of learning languages, and brain functioning. On one side, you had a lot of people very interested in understanding neural correlates, which, as its name suggests, is neuroscientific research that tries to reveal how language processing influences brain activity, but not only brain activity as in which part of the brain is active while we're talking or we're learning to speak and to understand language, but also understanding how the interconnected networks of the brain provide the foundation for cognitive development, meaning developing consciousness, developing language skills, spatial skills, social skills, and so on. So the impact on cognitive development is also understood in terms of the insights that come from linguistic studies, which tell us a lot about how language is acquired and how overall cognitive function develops in early childhood. Early childhood is my current area of focus. And if I take all of these connections between the fields to a more personal level, Claudia has already said that I did a BA in English language at the ISL in Paraguay. And it is through teaching English as a foreign language that I became really interested in neurolinguistics. That was a bit of the first step that took me to doing the research in the field that I'm doing at the moment. But also there was a moment in my professional history where I started working with education management, and there the situation became that I was to supervise and coordinate, but also advise teachers into what their teaching practices should look like in the classroom. And something that I realized very early is that it is not the same to have your own personal experiences with entering the classroom and trying to teach language to being in a managing position where you're supposed to supervise and advise others to perform better as teachers. It's actually quite a challenging task because very often the advice that you might give other professionals might not necessarily work or not turn out with the same outcomes that were useful for you. And that's where my interest in understanding more of how we learn, and as a consequence of understanding how we learn to improve the way we teach, grew a lot. And that's where I applied to pursue MSc, Master in Science, in Neuroscience and Education. And there I was expanding my knowledge into neurobiology, but with the intention of applying the knowledge that I was acquiring to how do we implement this new knowledge in neurobiology and developmental psychology to education, how we teach and how we understand that the processes of learning occur. And I did that master's with the support of Becal at the University of Bristol. And I also had the opportunity there to work with Professor Paul Howard-Jones. His name is over here in the article main author. I don't know if you can see my cursor when I'm going over the Prezi slides. But this professor was the one that developed the master's that I was doing. And he invited me to work as a research assistant in a project that he was working on at the time. And I was very happy to do so. And I put like a screenshot of the article so you have an idea of what it looks like if you want to look it up. And this study led to this publication. And what we did here was develop an intervention where Paul would be providing a workshop for teachers on what the researchers in Bristol call the science of learning. The science of learning refers to a framework of 9 principles that connect how we become motivated and engaged into an educational activity, how in the process of being part of the activity, we construct knowledge, and also what efforts can be done on the parts of the teachers and the students in order to consolidate knowledge, meaning making it long-lasting. So after Paul went to these schools in the UK, which were located at the different regions of England, we had planned I don't want to say questionnaire because it was a survey with Likert scales that had a pre and post condition, and we were asking the people that were attending the conferences to rate how effective were certain statements that referred to teaching methods. Some of these statements had a very easy to follow connection to scientific findings. Some of the statements that the teachers were ranking had no connection to scientific findings. And those statements that were not connected to any thought of prior studies were referred to as performative statements in this study. And that's why in this figure, you can see that there is the results of the ratings for before and after the intervention or the workshop with Paul, and you have the scientific concepts on the left side, and then you have the performative statements on the right side. I can give you an example of what these performative statements were like. This idea of learning styles, for example. There's actually no scientific basis to claim that certain people learn more in visual terms or through auditory means. So that's what we would refer to as a performative statement. What happened after the intervention was that we compared the surveys from before and after the intervention. And what we found was that the teachers were more likely to rate the scientific concepts higher as more effective after the workshop, and the performative statements lower. So this is the desired outcome, meaning that apparently on the surface, the conclusion would be that after the teachers were given an introduction to the science of learning, where they were working on concepts coming from neuroscience, developmental psychology, applied to education, they were capable of understanding scientific concepts much better, and also to discard the value or the effectiveness that they assigned to performative statements that had no scientific basis. Something else that we did after this was to do a follow-up little survey, not with the 585 participants that were part of the workshops, but with a subsample. And we tried to check if a few months after this effect of change in teacher philosophy and understanding of scientific concepts remained, and it did. And I want to move away a little bit from this study just to mention that during my master's, I did something quite similar with a population of teachers in Paraguay. It was a much smaller sample. It was about 50 participants then. And this effect that we found in the UK was not found with the teachers in Paraguay. In Paraguay, I did not do the follow-up after a few months to see if there was any effect, but I did perform the surveys right before and right after the workshop or intervention. And what we found there is that both the scientific concepts and the performative statements were also rated higher as more effective after the intervention. And that's a cue to interpreting that it could also just have been that the teachers were trying to please the researcher and rating everything higher, but not really capable of differentiating what we were calling scientific concepts from performative statements. That's fairly common in psychology research. to be honest, that there would be a social desirability effect. I think I wanted to mention that because bearing in mind the context where you are performing your studies is crucial in order to understand the findings. And I'm a big fan of replication studies. So I'm going to move on from these slides, and I want to go on to focus into what I'm doing now. After my master's, I had picked up a great interest in the overlap of emotion and cognition. I think this is one of my internally driven strongest areas of interest. And once I applied to become a PhD student at the University of Uppsala, which is where I live now, I was tasked with presenting a project for the PhD position on an area that was of my interest solely. So I reached out to the professor that had published the position. I think I want to talk about the logistics of getting a PhD position also, because this is quite crucial little details on that process that are not so easy information to catch when you are in that process of going from a master's to a PhD, and when you really want to build a professional path in doing research full-time eventually, with some teaching on the side, which is always going to happen if you're working at a university level. So I reached out to the professor that had published the position, and I asked him, is there anything that your lab is currently working on that you would like a PhD student to focus their project on? And this person said, math anxiety. Those two words were the only answer that I got. And so as a consequence of that, I went on to read everything I could find on mathematics anxiety. And I discovered that it's quite a wide research field. There's been over 60 years of a focus in trying to understand what the emotional connection to thinking about mathematics and also performing mathematical calculations means for individuals and also groups. And they coined this term mathematics anxiety as a type of anxiety that is somehow connected to test anxiety and also to general anxiety, but at the same time is a very specific set of symptoms and reactions of people while they are performing mathematical calculations. One neighboring research field that has produced a lot of the data that we can now look at in order to understand or to try to understand what math anxiety is mathematical cognition. And that's not such a wide field, but basically mathematical cognition are the efforts to try and understand how we make sense out of magnitude and numbers and how we develop mathematical skills, informally and also formally. And what I mean by that is that there is a focus on what happens in preschool, what happens in primary school, and how we become educated in mathematics. But there is also an interest in understanding how we come about understanding the concept of one, and how is 2 different to 1, and how is 3 different to 2 and to 1. And these are actually steps in development that take quite a long time for children to acquire and to express. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. And when I moved to Uppsala, I moved in the middle of the pandemic, and that meant that I would have to be very creative in how I would conduct the first study of my PhD, because I couldn't visit schools, and I most probably, it was not going to be worth the risk for me to try and work with children at that stage. But since the professor that I was working with when I moved to Uppsala was not only connected to the Department of Education, but also to Uppsala's Child and Baby Lab. I joined a project where they were trying to address teachers all over Uppsala, the community, to try and figure out what the teachers were more worried about teaching. And that study was designed based on the preschool curriculum of Uppsala. And I jumped on that project in order to annex a section of this questionnaire that would digitally ask teachers to rate statements about mathematics anxiety levels, subdivided in mathematics anxiety and mathematics teaching anxiety. And in parallel to that section of the survey, I designed a set of questions that would elicit from the teachers how frequently they talk and they taught mathematics to the children in the preschools. Also bearing in mind that the word teaching is not of a frequent occurrence in the Swedish preschools. The Swedish preschools are characterized by a pedagogy that is often summarized as learning through play. So in comparison to neighboring Northern European countries like Germany or the UK, the preschool in Sweden, first of all, keeps children up to the age of 5 in preschool. And then there is a level sandwiched in between preschool and primary school that is called förskoleklass, where things start looking a bit more formal. But the preschool is all about developing skills broadly, not in specific subject areas or getting exam ready at all. So it's based on Reggio Emilia, a lot, other similar pedagogies. So when I asked teachers how frequently they taught mathematics, that was a very abstract question in many ways, because in the preschool, you don't have, in Sweden, in the preschool, you don't have a calendar stating at what time of the day you're going to teach the children mathematics. But you do talk about mathematics a lot. And of course, you develop the language that is necessary to understand not only numbers, but magnitude and geometric concepts. But you do this while you are setting the table and while you are playing a game outside in the snow, and you need to show the children the limits of the area where you're going to be playing a game. The results of this are shown in this study, and this one is first authored by me. So this is my first official first author paper and my first study of the PhD, where what we explored was the relationship between the math anxiety levels of the teachers that replied to this questionnaire. And when I say teachers, I mean certified preschool teachers and also the pedagogues that work in a same class that in Sweden is divided from 1 to 3 year olds. And then there is usually another group that is 3 to 5 year olds. So we explored the relation of these educators' math anxiety levels and the frequency with which they talk about mathematics, not only in the classrooms, but also in the halls or while setting the table and in the garden. And the questionnaire looked like that. And you can access the materials by checking out this article. And the frequency with which teachers self-reported to teach and to talk about mathematics was negatively correlated with their levels of math anxiety. This is not a big surprise, but in the mathematics anxiety literature, there is a lot of work connecting the levels of mathematics anxiety of the students and their performance in mathematics, meaning test results or actual measurements of mathematics calculations, timing and effectiveness. But when we talk about the possible causes of mathematics anxiety, there are genetic reasons, environmental reasons, and among those causes from the environment that seem to have an influence in why children develop fear or apprehension towards becoming more involved with mathematics, you have parents and teachers are as potential role models of prior relationships with mathematics that are not very positive. So there is a term called intergenerational effect of mathematics anxiety, but the research that we are lacking is the research that can tell us how the actions of teachers or parents can have an influence in the development of mathematics anxiety in the children that they are in contact with. So in that sense, this study, what did was to show us how anxious the teachers are is connected to their pedagogic actions in the school. So that was what is connected to the overall topic of my PhD project, which is mathematics anxiety. But the second point of this presentation is connected to using eye tracking as a method that offers insights into pre-conscious behavior and also cognitive processes, ongoing cognitive processes that we are aware of. That's why this statement is split here between pre-conscious, what happens before you are aware of it, and cognitive processes that you are voluntarily choosing to perform. And this, in simple terms, is doing 2 + 3, right? You'll be aware of the fact that you are adding 2 + 3, but the idea is that eye tracking can support you also in trying to capture what is happening before you are performing this conscious activity 2 + 3. And sorry, I think I have do I have a question? What are the ways that Swedish education work that you can see that would be necessary and easy to implement in Paraguay? Okay, I will answer this question at the end, so I can continue with eye tracking now, okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so it's great to hear your voice, by the way, because it gets lonely here when I'm talking on my own. Thank you for the question, though. I will answer it at the end. So how does eye tracking come to be part of the research that I'm doing? First of all, the people that I work with at the Uppsala Child and Baby Lab are responsible for a lot of the studies using eye tracking with babies and young children, like at a world level. And they've done a lot of very interesting work with babies. There is a seminal paper, like we like to call it in research, which is probably the most quoted referred to paper from one of my supervisors, one of my PhD supervisors, Gustav Gredebeck, that is actually called pupillometry, a window to the pre-conscious. And by pupillometry, they are referring to using eye tracking technology in order to capture how much the pupils dilate or constrict as people are performing different actions, like reading or extending the hands to grab an object, or while people are looking at each other in an attempt to discuss a point of interest, which is called joint attention in psychology, when a baby points to an object in order to call the adult's attention and ask for the object to be handed to them. All of this can be studied with great detail when you have the support of eye tracking technology. Eye tracking technology is not only used to study the size of the pupils, which is actually what I do in my second study that I'm going to talk about in a minute, but eye tracking technology can also be used to track where someone is looking at a screen. The most simple setup of an eye tracking tool would be to have a screen like you can see here in the picture, and the eye tracker is a very lightweight bar that is magnetically attached at the bottom of the screen. And what the eye tracker does is it projects near infrared light into your eyes. And with the reflection of this light, the eye tracker is capable of tracking where in the screen you are looking and how fast you are shifting your gaze from one point to another in the screen. And of course, what I work with, which is tracking how big your pupils get and how much they constrict as I am showing you a teddy bear, or as I am asking you to solve a mathematical exercise, or as I am asking you to detect a geometric form that is different, the odd one out in a group of 4, for example. It's very easy to learn how to use it. It's relatively not so expensive in comparison to setting up an fMRI, for example, or even EEG, electroencephalogram technology. You can take it to a classroom. You can also have eye tracking technology embedded into glasses. Google has those, and also Tobii Eye, which is the company that we work with. It's actually a Swedish company. So what did I do for my study too? I wanted to design a study that would allow me to focus both in how the pupils of the eyes dilate and contract right before children and adults are about to perform a mathematical exercise, and then to continue tracking the size of the pupils as they are actually performing a mathematical calculation, and also what happens with the pupils once they give you an answer. But I said earlier that there are lots of studies that focus on how math anxious people are and the impact that this has, for example, in the school grades, what they call math performance. The field is kind of obsessed with linking these two things together, and to get the answers that look as the more anxious you are, the less proficient you are at performing in mathematics. And we know that this relationship is there already. And I am quite interested in understanding more of why this happened and how it happens at a neurobiological level. And I wanted to focus my study in what happens right before, what happens when the people see the numbers, and then what happens when the people are actually calculating the result of a math exercise. So I designed an experimental study, and I brought in 65-year-olds to Uppsala's Child and Baby Lab. And since they would have to come with one of their parents, I also designed the experimental setup to collect the data from the parents as well, which was great fun to do because his parents are used to bringing their babies to the lab, but not to perform the exercises themselves. So that was a plus because it was a long meeting with each of the parents and their children. It was about an hour. So it helped that it had other elements in it. For example, the parents completed the same survey that the teachers had completed in my first study. And with the children, I have to come up with creative ways to get a sense of what the children's relationship with mathematics is. And that meant that I had to sit on the floor and play a game of dices with the children. And we had to speak in Swedish until they could trust me and they would show me how much they liked performing mathematical calculations, but not only how much they liked it, but we had conversations about what about these things that you know that you have to do, but you don't really want to do them. And then when you are in a group of people in school, you have to do it anyway. And in the publication of these studies, you can actually find a link to a video that shows you how I'm performing that game with the children. I'm using a mat that has a happy smiley on one end, a sad smiley on the other, and a ruler of numbers at the bottom. And what they do is they play with dice and then they tell me how much they like doing that. Then we talk about playing with geometric magnet toys and Legos. And we compare that to playing with letters and trying to read out words. And what we found in this study is that we could clearly connect the level of mathematics anxiety to a negative relationship with the moment in which the adults, the 60 parents, saw the numbers. We could not find an effect of math anxiety when we were connecting the levels of math anxiety to the amount of dilation of the pupils while they were solving the mathematical calculations, which was the most obvious hypothesis that should have come from this study. The expected outcome would have been that the more anxious the adult is, the more the pupils dilate at the moment that they are actually solving the mathematical exercise. But it's a bit tricky to try and test something like this because the pupils dilate for many reasons. One of them being the amount of light that they are exposed to. And there is also what we refer to as the effect of task difficulty, which means that the harder an exercise becomes, the more the pupils dilate while you are trying to solve that exercise. And that is known as cognitive load. So we had to untangle what was pupil dilation connected to an effect of mathematics anxiety and what was pupil dilation connected to the difficulty of the task, and explore those relationships. And that's what is explored in this study. We did find an effect of mathematics anxiety at the moment the adults saw the numbers, and in the children group, this effect was not there. And this suggests that either these children have not developed a level of mathematics anxiety that actually has an effect in the way they perform while they're solving mathematical calculations, or there is also a possibility that the very anxious teachers from the first study that are not very frequently talking about mathematics are actually just not working on mathematics frequently enough in the preschool level for the children to develop either a positive or a negative relation to mathematics. So that's what this study is about. And now we are at 10:15 here. So I guess is it 6:15 for you?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So, and I wanted to jump on to, okay, so before I leave what my ongoing work with the PhD at the moment, they're hanging, and move on to the next topic, which is the replication project in Paraguay, the intercontinental studies part of the presentation. I just wanted to mention briefly that my PhD has 4 studies planned. The first one was a questionnaire that I talked about before. The second study is the eye tracking study. And the third study implied video recording information in the preschools, where my focus would be to video record spontaneous and also planned moments in the preschool where there is interaction of the teachers with the children in order to apply a type of analysis called interaction analysis, which is very similar to discourse analysis. Although you're not only focusing on what the children and the teachers are saying, but I'm also focusing on what they're doing with their bodies and their gesturing, and to try and understand how it is that emotion is handled at the preschool level between these two subjects. And that's what I'm going to be working in the next year. I have the video recorded data from the preschools already, and now I need to learn how to do interaction analysis at a very detailed level. Meanwhile, in June, I went to Paraguay and I set up a collaboration with a researcher working at the UCOM, the Universidad Comunera in Paraguay. She's called Carla Fernandez, who's been assigned as our PI collaborator in Paraguay, in order for us to replicate a study from a coworker called Ellen Schroeder, who also is interested in mathematical cognition and the developmental trajectories of numerical and spatial abilities, how these connect to language. She also works with babies. And during her PhD, she conducted this study over here that is also published, and it was a very successful intervention where what she did was asking parents to play for 8 weeks with their 8-month-old babies with building blocks. And it's also, the setup is very similar to all the studies that I've been talking about earlier today. It's a randomized controlled trial. So she had a study population, and then she performed a pre-test, and she had a condition that is called the control condition and a treatment condition, and then she was running some post-tests. The eye tracking testing in this study comes in at the pre-test moment and also the post-test moment. In this study, there was no follow-up examination, but the study is called Play Enhances Visual Form Perception in Infancy, because what they found here was that the group of parents and babies that play with blocks for this 8 weeks intervention showed that the babies were capable of detecting geometrical forms faster than the babies that were part of the control condition, which were actually reading books with their parents. So in the control condition with babies, you don't want to have them do anything negative. So in this case, they were asking the parents to read books to their children, expecting that with this being able to differentiate the effect of manipulating blocks and touching the blocks and building with blocks, which is what we suspect is connected to actively exploring the shapes, and as a consequence of that, being able to detect the diverse geometrical forms faster later on. So this study we want to replicate in Paraguay, and we are already on the go. We've taken an eye tracker to Paraguay, and we want to expand also the possibility of explaining what it is that is happening in this intervention. And we want to do that by asking the parents that will be playing with their children with the building blocks to video record their interactions so that we can analyze these interactions later and get a sense of if it is playing with the toys that helps the children detect geometric forms faster, or if it is the amount of eye contact and physical contact between the parent and the child. Is it all of these things together? Can we find the same results in Paraguay that we found in Sweden? And Paraguay also gives us the opportunity to reach out to groups of participants of very different socioeconomic background origin. This is quite unfortunate because it is connected to the gap between the rich and the poor that we have in our country, but it makes it a perfect location in terms of research goals. So with the plan in Paraguay is to have 200 8-month-olds and one adult that is responsible for performing this playing with blocks or singing will be the case in Paraguay intervention with the 8-month-old babies. We've also assumed several adaptations for this context. For example, the fact that if we ask parents in Paraguay to read books to their 8-month-olds, that might have been something very odd in the routine of such young babies in Paraguay. So we decided that in the control conditions, the parents would be singing with their babies instead, also for 5 minutes during 8 weeks. So once all this data is collected, we'll be able to know whether there is not only an effect of the intervention, but also if it is in any way affected by the level of socioeconomic status of the families that are part of the study. There are many ways in which these results can go about, but I think that what is important to talk about the replication project that we are doing in Paraguay is not so much about the results of this study yet, because the data hasn't been collected yet. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what this means logistically, because one level of this process is connected to setting up the logistics, right? Finding the people in the country where you want to collaborate for a research study, finding a responsible that will be interested in becoming the principal investigator of the project, not only for the scientific part, but also to be able to set up the contact with the community, for example. That for this type of studies is crucial, especially if you don't have a database of people that you can just call and ask if they want to come again to the Child and Baby Lab of Uppsala, like we do in Sweden. In Sweden, the Child and Baby Lab has been ongoing with the research for 20 years. So the people that we call, they know who we are, they know about our studies, they've been there before with their older children, and it becomes really easy to call them back. But it's also a very specific type of population. In Uppsala, most parents that bring their babies to the lab have a PhD themselves or are very highly educated and interested in supporting scientific research already. Whereas all these steps of approaching the community, building trust, and creating a database of possible participants are things that need to start from scratch in a country like Paraguay. Then the aspects connected to, for example, being able to buy the eye tracker and to take it there. There are aspects that are connected to making it known for the local community that this study is going on and that it's in the hands of responsible people that you're going to be giving your babies to in order to perform some experiments. There's administrative paperwork that needs to be done, ethics applications, the management of where the funds come from, and the people that you need to employ at the local level, in this case, Paraguay, in order to pay the research assistants a salary. And by this means also formalize the research roles in the country. Materials, like in this case, the blocks that the participants need to play with at home that they're going to keep later on. This all costs money, of course. And I wanted to give you an idea of what that means for our project at the moment. In investing in the eye tracker and the trips that we made to Paraguay, the time of the people that are connected to this project, there is an initial investment of about $40,000 at the moment. And this is before we've done any data collection or bought materials yet. If you want to ask me questions about that, I'm very happy to talk about that later. This slide was just to give you an idea of that sequence of my PhD studies. We had the first study that was the survey connecting how math anxious teachers are with how frequently they talk and teach mathematics in preschool. Then there's the eye tracking study, where I'm looking at the influence of mathematics anxiety at the moment the participants are performing mathematical calculations. And then the third study, which will probably result in 2 different papers, is a study where I video recorded information that I intend to analyze through a technique called interaction analysis, where what I will be looking at are the actions sequence in the construction of emotions in interaction. Yeah, so I think I will stop there so we can move to the questions with time. And I'm open for critique and suggestions and the possibility to work in any interesting project. Yep.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your presentation on such an interesting topic. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we can now begin with the questions. We have 2 in the Q&A. So the first one is the one that you read before. What are the ways that Swedish education work that you can see that will be necessary and also easy to implement in Paraguay, since you talk about how you usually work with the preschools and stuff? What do you think?
So I think, and this is more of my personal opinion perhaps than my scientific view on the matter. I am a big fan of the Swedish preschool system. I think that it's the clear explanation for the development of social skills and the positive relationship that young children develop with all subject areas. As a human being, I'm also not interested in children just learning mathematics and becoming engineers. I'm perfectly fine with them wanting to become artists and also doing mathematics on the side if they need it for the finances in their life. But I'm pro developing overall sets of skills rather than focusing on one single area. It's tricky to look at a model in a country where there is a reason why the preschool ended up looking like that. The biggest reason being actually that parents needed to send their children somewhere when they went to work. And it's hard to look at that model and to just say, if we were to do in Paraguay what the Swedish people do in this aspect, for example, let's say focusing in how the teachers develop social skills in the children in Sweden. And then we wanted to copy that one aspect only in Paraguay. It's very hard to say that this will have the same effect in Paraguay. The context is very different. The cultural bagage is really different as well. The education of the teachers is strikingly different. The way that the teaching professor is valued is also very different in the society. But if there is something that can be copied from the Swedish education model and easy to implement in Paraguay, I would say we have to start from creating a curriculum that can give us guidelines to determine as a country what is it that we want our preschools to achieve. Because at the moment, not only is the goal of the preschool totally disconnected, for example, when you compare Paraguayan public schools and private schools, but also where the teachers learn to become pedagogues is not, there are not broad goals and agreements as to what we want to do with our preschools. Is it that we want the children to enter first grade already reading and writing? What are the values that we are expecting to transmit? So I would say one thing we can do is create the documentation that allows us to unify goals as a country. How each preschool implements or performs activities in order to reach those goals, it's always going to vary. It varies everywhere. It also varies in Sweden. But we need to make agreements as to what is it that we want. And we need to bear in mind that we are a country with a vast population of people in poverty that need the support of educational institutions like the preschool, not only to learn how to read and write and count, but also to provide breakfast and lunch and emotional support, and to focus on working with the parents to get involved in the education of their children. So the role of the preschool in a country like Paraguay is very broad. It's not only about pedagogical aspects and how teachers deal with children. It's also about, did the children that are coming to the preschool have breakfast today? Or else what can we expect? Okay, next question.
That's true. Thank you so much. The next question is, how can insights from eye tracking studies be used to improve teacher-student interactions in early childhood education, particularly in identifying and addressing unconscious bias?
Okay, so let's start by breaking down unconscious biases, right? So Because unconscious biases are the ones that are problematic. If you have conscious biases, that's perfectly fine. It means that the person is aware already of the type of choices that they're making. Now, unconscious biases are not only tricky to get rid of, but they are also hard to say that they do exist. Just because the people behave in a way, it doesn't mean that we necessarily understand why they are behaving in that way. So that's a whole mystery in its own in psychological and neuroscientific research as well. But the question is about how can insights from eye tracking studies be used to improve teacher-student interactions? So one example that we can pick up is what I am doing with using eye tracking technology in order to better understand what are the overlaps of the emotional and cognitive processes that are going on when children are solving mathematical exercises, for example. So I gave you an example today of how eye tracking technology can be used to understand some cognitive processes. Now, how can eye tracking studies be used to improve teacher-student interactions? It's a very tricky question, because at this moment, eye tracking technology is not capable of supporting our understanding of interactions yet. At its best, is able to pick up data from individuals in interaction with other individuals. Something that some researchers are very hyped about is the use of eye tracking glasses, because they are portable, and then you can take them to the classroom, and then you can pick up a lot of information about where the teachers are looking or what they tend to focus on. So that might be there might be a way to use eye tracking glasses in order to detect, for example, how frequently a specific teacher tends to focus on women instead of men in the classroom, or how much attention they're providing to a certain group of students that might be the most or the least dedicated in the group. But to detecting unconscious bias is a bit of a step after that. I don't think that field is that developed yet. And for as much as I get excited when I read about the tests online in order to detect unconscious biases, consciousness and unconsciousness are very, very tricky areas so far. But I think I hope I might have given you some sort of level of answer for this by now.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, so to honor our schedule, because we're a little bit over time, we're gonna stop here, but thank you so much, Laura. That was really interesting. I think I learned a lot actually. So thank you so much to you and to the audience as well for participating in this session. I would like to remind everyone that you can watch this session again on our YouTube channel. And I will also like to invite you all to our next webinar that we will discuss about developing circular economy in Paraguay's food and packaging industry. That is on Wednesday, 4th of September at 7:30 p.m. the Paraguayan time. And for us in Australia, it's going to be Thursday at 9:30 a.m. And it's going to be a very insightful panel with representatives from the field, such as Liz Rios, Jose Melis, Veronica Aguayo, and Silvina Sforza. So thank you so much again, Laura. This was really awesome. Thank you so much. And to everyone,
Thank you,
great session.
Yeah, great. And contact me if you want to collaborate for anything.
That will be awesome. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.